Welcome, everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Denise Ross, former Chief Data Scientist of the United States, and now a Senior Advisor at the Federation of American Scientists. Today, I'm joined by Megan Morey, who is my former colleague in the White House and also served as the Chief of Staff for the Chief Data Officer in the Department of Commerce, America's data agency. And now Megan is at the center of many data policy conversations in civil society. So welcome to today's webinar on how to write a public comment on federal data. It's hosted by dataindex-us. If you have questions throughout the webinar, please put those in the Q&A box. We will have dedicated time at the end for live Q&A. And after the webinar, we'll follow up by email with the recording, slides, and any links that we shared. Given the rapid pace of changes to data across the federal government, we're hosting this webinar today to highlight the value of public comments and walk through how the submission process works and answer questions that help put this process in context with the current state of federal data. So just to set the scene a little bit, those of us who use federal data are often used to working with what we're given and not recognizing that we can actually influence the nature of the data that's flowing out of the federal government. And this is a participatory democracy, and federal data are our data. And so it's up to federal agencies to seek out input from the public. And it's also up to us to lean in and make our voices heard. I made the switch myself from a data user to a data advocate in the wake of Hurricane Katrina more than 20 years ago, when I recognized that in order to be able to chart a path toward an equitable recovery, we really needed the American Community Survey data to kick into action. And there was a risk that it might not get the funding that it needed. So I remember, I think even before I went home after I evacuated from Katrina, I got a secondhand suit and came up to DC and spoke at Brookings about how New Orleans needed the American Community Survey to be fully funded in order for us to have the insights we needed for our recovery. And I never turned back. And I'm really grateful to be able to share what we've learned about public comments here. The other great thing about this point in history is that now the process of public input into data policy is codified through the Evidence Act, and which was signed by President Trump in the first term, which requires that federal data stewards seek input from public stakeholders about the value of the federal data that agencies are producing, and also how to improve those data so that they have a greater impact. So submitting comments is a proactive way to participate in the process of making federal data deliver for the American people and the American economy. And that's the case now more than ever. And that's why we stood up dataindex-us back in early 2025 to make it easier for public stakeholders like all of you all to participate in federal policy making around data. So we'll start with our slides now. What the section of the dataindex.us website that Megan will be talking about is our take action slide. And what we do here is Megan compiles and summarizes all the data related to public comment opportunities. So now I'll hand it off to Megan Morey to walk us through the public comment process.
Thank you so much, Denise. And thanks to everyone who's joining. This is basically my favorite topic of conversations. I couldn't be more thrilled to be here. As Denise laid out for us all, um, the federal government conducts thousands of programs, from public benefit programs like SNAP and WIC to providing small business loans and student loans to conducting surveys on public health and housing. All of those programs require federal agencies to collect information from the public through applications, forms, surveys, and the like. And as you can imagine, all that paperwork really adds up. So in the late 70s, when people were frankly pretty cranky about government paperwork, especially businesses that felt really buried in reporting requirements, Congress responded by creating a system to sort of like rein in that paperwork burden and create a process that helped agencies justify what they were asking and why they were asking for it. They called that the Paperwork Reduction Act. Uh, it requires agencies to prove that data collection is necessary, useful, and not overly burdensome. And perhaps more importantly, it created a process that gave the public a chance to weigh in on the collections along the way. So the process itself is pretty clunky. We're not going to go into too much detail, but on this slide, you can see kind of what the process looks like in a really simplified way. Agencies draft a form or survey or other collection, then they ask the public for input on that draft. They revise the collection in response to our input. Then they send it to OMB, which oversees the whole process. OMB also asks us for input. And then the agency makes sort of any changes that OMB requires and finalizes the form and is able to actually use it. Today, I just want to focus on two parts of this process. Those two um, places where agencies and OMB are asking for input from the public. At both of these stages, we see a notice that shows up in the Federal Register, but each of those notices are technically a tiny bit different. In this first stage, the agency is asking for us for input, and they're asking us for input based on those concerns that brought the PRA into light. They're asking, is the collection necessary? Is the amount of burden on the public for answering these questions reasonable? And is our design effective? In the second stage, uh, the OMB is asking us for input, and in that stage, there's like a shorter input process. They only ask us for input for about 30 days. And it's more focused on whether the issues that came up in that first input process were resolved. In both of these windows, agencies again post about what they're doing in the Federal Register to ask us for input. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Federal Register, I think of it kind of like the Facebook for federal government. Agencies are like posting every single day about what they're doing, and they hope that their friends, the American people, will like it or comment on what they're doing. But mostly people don't because it's kind of boring and it's kind of hard to find what you're looking for, and it has a lot of junk in it that you don't care about. So one way to find these opportunities to public comment is to read the Federal Register every day, which I do highly recommend. I find it fascinating. But if that feels daunting to you, we do that for you, and we post the things that we think are relevant to data on that take action page that you saw a little bit before. Okay, so in these postings about data collection on the Federal Register, agencies are required to justify and ask for our opinion on these four things. Um, First, why the data that they're collecting is necessary to do their work. Second, whether they've estimated the burden accurately. Third, whether the information that they're collecting will be accurate and usable. And fourth, whether they've minimized burden. And the reason I put these four pieces up on this slide is that understanding what the agencies are asking you about helps you craft a public comment that is relevant to the process that exists. Um, and I just want to say, on paper, this might feel like sort of like a cog in the wheel of bureaucracy. Like there's like a big process that exists for all these data collections. But I think in practice, it is one of the few places where the public can really shape what the government does. So I like to think of it as a place to sort of practice active democracy. It's a place where we can really have a voice in what our government is doing for us. So what we are going to talk about today is when you're providing that input or public comment, how do you do that effectively? I'm going to give you a few tips, and then I know Denise has a couple of questions prepped for me. And then if you all have questions, I'll answer as many of them as I can today. But we're also going to open office hours once a month where you can come to ask questions about specific commenting opportunities or ask general questions about concepts about commenting. So don't feel like this is your only chance. We'll get to what we can today, but we only have a half an hour together, so we're gonna get to what we can. So here are my 5 tips. Number one, I will say the most important thing to think about when you're writing a public comment is what is your purpose? What are you trying to change? You might be trying to show support for continued collection of data. Uh, right now, we're seeing a lot of data collections kind of under threat. The funding is going away, staffing is going away, or we know that there's not a ton of support for that collection in government. So you might just be weighing in to say, look, this data collection is really important to me. You may also be trying to get the agency to kind of change how the collection gets done, ask different questions, ask it in a different way, ask it to a different community. Or you might be trying to argue that collection is too complicated or puts too much burden on communities um, than it needs to. I urge you to think about your purpose before you dive into writing a comment. I think often we do this kind of commenting work by rote, and we're not always thinking through what are the core things that we want to the agency to do in response to our comment. So spend your time on the front end thinking about your purpose. Uh, I, Second tip, I would say to write the most effective comments on data collections, it's really helpful to ground your language in that those PRA requirements that we talked about earlier. If you're trying to show support for continued collection, use that language from the PRA and say the collection is necessary for XYZ purposes. If you're trying to change how the data are collected because you think it could be done better or that they should be collecting more information about a particular community, talk about how those changes would enhance the quality, utility, and clarity of the collection as they're required to do under the PRA. If you think a collection is too complicated or too difficult, uh, frame that in terms of minimizing burden on respondents. That is not language that we normally use as regular human people. But because the PRA frames it that way, if you talk about a collection being too difficult, you might want to frame it related to burden. You can also, in the flip side of that, say, adding new questions or sampling a different community or collecting in a different way would not dramatically increase the burden. And so agencies should consider that. And I'll just say, when you're doing this, you're not just giving an opinion, you're helping the agency do their work better. That's what we do in a democracy. We encourage our government to govern in a way that benefits the people the most, or you're helping OMB to evaluate whether the agency has met its legal standards under the PRA. Okay, third tip, be concrete and propose an actual workable solution to the problem that you're pointing out. Uh, so often, as I'm reading public comments that people have posted in response to information collections or proposed rules or other things that show up in the Federal Register, you hear the comments are really vague, and they'll just say, I think this collection is dumb. That's not helpful to anyone. Be specific. Tell them what you think the problem is and give them a way to fix it. Um, if you're talking about burden, for example, you might say, this will require X community to take Y action, and that's going to reduce response rates and because the burden is so high. And also when you're proposing a solution, uh, give them concrete alternatives that'll reduce burden or result in more quality data. I've given you one example here. If you're commenting on ID requirements, for example, you might say accessing ID is going to require people experiencing homelessness to spend an estimated 60 hours to acquire relevant documentation. An alternative solution that will have less burden is to rely on self-attestation. People just saying, I am who I am. It'll eliminate the burden and is unlikely to cause high rates of fraud or misuse of government access. Agencies are most likely to respond if an issue is clearly defined and the fix that you propose is feasible. So, a great comment, often you can just think of it as here's the problem, here's a practical alternative. Okay, fourth tip. Uh, this is a tip, but it's also a way of being. Think about clarity over perfection. A lot of people get daunted by this process. They think they need to write a 50-page treatise on the data collection or explain some real, technical methodological concepts. It doesn't have to be that way. The most important thing is that your comment is clear. If it's well structured, if it's readable, it is more useful to those of us in government than a really dense comment that's hard for them to conceptually understand or to kind of untangle the weeds of your technical comment. Of course, if you speak the same language as agency staff, if you've worked with that agency staff for a really long time and that you know that they're going to understand the proposal, the technical proposal that you're putting forward or the legal principle that you're referring to, great. But as a general rule, clarity is better than perfection. Um, and I will say, real world experience is important to include in part because it gives you credibility. If you've used this form or taken this survey or used the data from a collection before, and can talk about how a question will be misunderstood, who's going to be excluded or harmed, what data will be missed or distorted, that's really, really powerful for agency staff. You can often illustrate this kind of thing really clearly with a well-placed real life example. Okay, tip number five, remember the long game. So often people ask me now, is there a point to public commenting if the administration's already made its choices about how collection's going to be done? And I will say, uh, th these collections get revised every 3 years, and agency staff often look at and think about the comments that were made on previous iterations of data collections when they're revising a collection in the future. So you can kind of shape the future of that data collection, even if you can't make a change right now. But that's not the only reason we public comment. Often people put in comments so that they can create a record for oversight entities or for future litigation. Or they use public commenting almost as an organizing tool. So you can sort of signal the priorities of your movement or of a issue area by putting it in a public comment that you then put out to the field. So I'll stop there. I know Denise has a couple of questions for me on strategy, and I'm hoping you all do too. I see a couple in the Q&A already. If you got more questions, throw them in the chat. We'll get to what we can today. And again, I hope folks come to office hours if you have additional questions. And if your question's more time sensitive and we can't get to it today, don't hesitate to reach out to me directly. This is honestly my favorite topic of conversation. I believe in democracy. I think we should all have a voice in it. This is one way you can. I'd love to talk. Okay, Denise, over to you.
Thanks, Megan. Such a great overview. I wanted to point to a clarifying question that's in the Q&A from Rebecca about a data comment from the USDA that doesn't seem to be related to PRA. Are PRA questions always labeled as such?
No. So sometimes the things we see in the Federal Register are listed as requests for information, RFIs. Sometimes they're even proposed rules that are making broader changes to how an agency does data collection. And sometimes we don't even find them in the Federal Register. There are ongoing comment opportunities through federal agency websites and elsewhere that can also be really, really helpful ways to kind of engage with agencies on how they're doing this work.
Thanks. So my first question comes from some experience I had when I was in the White House and we issued an RFI about policing data. And I remember this sheriff from Corinth, Texas, wrote uh, just a real simple, paragraph describing how burdensome it was for his agency, his small agency, to enter data into these different forms that the FBI and DOJ had. And he described how his admin assistant, like this is just added to the piles of her work to do this data entry. And he was asking that, the federal government, reduce that burden and reconcile some of these systems. And that comment got so much traction because it was something that I could talk about when I was in meetings with people, because I could invoke, this law enforcement leader from a small town in Texas and how burdensome this is for him. So can you talk a little bit more about how formal or informal do these comments need to be?
They don't have to be formal at all. Sometimes a formal comment can be really, really powerful, especially if, again, it's really diving into the details of how a collection is used or that kind of thing. But again, these informal comments can be just as powerful, and sometimes they're more moving for folks. I think sometimes people inside federal agencies, they become so accustomed to only hearing from what I think of as like the grass tops or the experts, the really detailed legal comments or technical comments that they can almost become a little bit too cool for school about it. They're like they're like so used to hearing from us that the really heartfelt, meaningful comments that are just a paragraph or two and coming from the heart and really talking about something informally can be almost more powerful than those technical ones.
Thanks. And a follow-up to that, are sign-on letters or templates still effective? So, in other words, is the sign-on letter dead? Especially given AI, for example, like how has that changed the calculus here?
Yeah, great question. I think I have two answers for this. One is sign-on letters have become a little bit less effective inside government because uh, I think agencies often think of a sign-on letter as still just one public comment. It's just like one opinion about how they should do their work. But I still think even if agencies are viewing it that way, sign-on comments can be really powerful in a network or in a movement to get us all on the same page about our opinions about stuff. It can help us create cohesion outside of government on what we think is the right path forward. So I think it's still a great organizing strategy, sometimes a little less effective inside. And I'll say the other tactic people ask me about a lot is comment drives, where you're encouraging people to submit public comments. And I think the comment drives where we see people submitting unique comments where you're saying to your constituents, hey, USDA is asking how they can do their work better. There is an RFI on that out right now, by the way. Um, in the statistical processes, if people are writing unique comments, I think that's really, really valuable. If people are using a template comment where they're just clicking a button and it submits a comment to the agency and they all look identical. Right now, agencies are kind of weeding those out. They're using AI and machine learning to take out substantially similar comments and kind of put them to the side. So I think those have become a little bit less effective inside government. But again, it can be a really good organizing tool just to get people to be aware of what's happening and feel like they've taken an action towards making a change. So
Great, thank you. And I think you just addressed Bernie Kluger's question, whether that was intentional or not. And Bernie was asking for a little bit of advice on how to get people interested in data policy when it's often not viewed as real policy. So, the webinars, the templates, these comment drives. Are you seeing any innovative ways that are really effective
you
at getting
know,
people to care?
Uh, it's gonna sound like I'm just trying to suck up to you, Denise, but Denise has this other website, America's Essential Data, where we've really shifted the frame of how we think about data from those technical data users like researchers or policymakers to the like person who's impacted by the data collection. So, like a football coach trying to make a determination about whether to host practice outside is using information about heat to that we collect in a more technical way to make those determinations about practice. Those kinds of shifts of helping people think about who's kind of like that end user of the data, I think have gotten a lot more folks intrigued about the value of data. But I think at the end of the day, organizing is tough work. It's you have to spend a lot of time talking to people about issues and helping them understand how it connects to their everyday life to get them really interested and intrigued. And I don't think that there's any shortcuts to getting there. I think we just have to spend the time slogging through and working with folks and helping lift up this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say, if you can boil it down to a short sentence, like a short story about how these data benefit everyday Americans, or how a change in the way the data is collected could have a larger impact, you just keep those in your back pocket, and they get so much play. And also, the media really likes them too. So it's worth the painful process of shifting the perspective from centering the data user and the experts to shifting the people who ultimately benefit. Technical question here about the revision of data collection every 3 years. Is it required across all agencies, or does that change is it based on statute, program, et cetera?
Yes, and so there's like a fundamental rule across through the PRA that every information collection has to be renewed at least every 3 years. So that is across agencies, across collections. But if you're making significant changes to a data collection in the interim between that 3 year period, uh, you're required to go through this process more frequently. And some statutes also require the process to happen more frequently if an information collection is required by statute. So it does vary, but there's that sort of like baseline of everybody having to go through it every few years.
Got it. And then last question, I'm going to combine a couple. One is, what if an agency doesn't ask for a comment on a specific aspect of the survey that I want to talk about? And then secondly, what about all of the data sets that are not subject to the Paperwork Reduction Act and aren't showing up necessarily in the Federal Register?
Yeah, that's right. So there's a lot of collections that there are a lot of exceptions to the PRA, uh, so we don't get as much of an opportunity to comment on those. You still can, at any time, reach out to a federal agency and say, "I have a comment about what you're doing for work," and they will take that in, read it, and it will actually go through a formal process internal to that agency. So still worth doing it. It's just a little bit more work on our end to find those and find a way the people to talk to and all of that. Um, and wait, what was the other half of the question?
And what about if, for example, you want to say something about a specific data set, but it doesn't seem like they're asking
Oh,
for information on that?
say it anyway. So, you can't constrain a democracy. We have a right to talk about whatever we want to talk about, and please say whatever you want. It's just if you can tie it back, and you can often tie it back to the quality and utility of the data, and that's just one good anchor that you can use for almost any comment that you have.
I love that. And once Andrew Reamer gave me the advice to request a meeting or a conversation with the agency stakeholders in your letter, also, and that sometimes works too, to
Yeah,
continue
and
it.
because they're so shocked that anyone has asked. So
Yeah,
please try it.
exactly. All right, Megan, I'm going to hand it back to you to close us out.
Awesome, fantastic. It's been so great to talk to you all today. I know we didn't get to everyone's questions, but just wanted to put a couple resources up here for you. Again, Data Index tracks relevant comment opportunities on data on our Take Action page. It's constantly refreshing, so go there. We've got about 90 opportunities available for you right now. We also send out a weekly-ish newsletter. Sometimes it's a little more frequent if there's a lot going on. Um, and you can sign up for that newsletter at this link. And we'll be hosting these office hours on the first Friday of each month. We're happy to provide you with whatever guidance we can on a particular data collection public comment period or on general questions that you have about public commenting. I can't get enough of talking about ways to be involved in your democracy. So please join me. I really do look forward to talking to y'all there.
Thanks, Megan. And I think we're going to be sending out a follow-up email to everyone who attended, and with the recording and the slides and information on Megan's new office hours. All right, have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks.